Councilwoman Yang, let me just end with you here. What is your message to people who are feeling sometimes as though politics is something to opt out of, to throw up their hands and no longer want to engage because they think maybe it's a fool's errand? What's your message to people to stay engaged in however the outcome in terms of who they vote for and who ends up in office? How do you keep them motivated to participate?
I think that's such a great question. And for me, as I reflect on my lived experiences as a daughter of refugees, that feeling of feeling like our voice is so small, or not knowing like how to stay engaged or how you even get started, or like not even being politically involved is a story that I know so well. And I feel like so many of us on the council right now know very well. And we know that that's something that has to stop, because policies and politics is very personal. And that is actually what has inspired so many of us to start taking action and start getting involved. And what we are committed to is making sure that we continue bringing people along in this work, doing the best that we can and fighting for justice and equity for all people.
This is creating a lot of excitement for a lot of people, particularly people of color and women, who see this as some kind of really great change. This is a great accomplishment that's taken place. And yes, having these women elected certainly does signify, a great change. This is an accomplishment to have an entire city council that's all women and women of color on top of that. But the problem is that it's not going to fundamentally change anything. You've changed the faces of the people in power, but you haven't changed the structure of power itself. It remains the same. Now, I understand that this gives people a lot of hope, and that when you point out how the hope is false, people get very angry at you. And it's important to psychologically understand why people have this. We are standing in a time of great uncertainty. We are looking at a presidential election that's filled with not really much in the way of hope in terms of choice. We've got Biden and we've got Trump. Biden, who's not representing anything new, anything creative, anything that's any different than the same old neoliberal order that has existed for decades. And Trump, who essentially is a fascist in waiting, is sitting there chomping at the bit to get into office to essentially pardon himself from all of the crimes that he's committed, which aren't terribly too different from the crimes of those who have sat in that chair before him. The only difference being that his threatened the integrity of the system and the veneer of officialdom and the veneer of democracy that is Western liberal capitalism. But these two men do represent essentially the same stodgy, old, decrepit order. And they, both of them being born just after World War II, still very much embody that. They still physically appear that way. And they still very much are a product of that. And by contrast, these women, they're young, they're people of color, they exude energy, they exude a whole embodiment of fresh, bold, new ideas, which they aren't actually new, creating more jobs and affordable housing. They're not new ideas. They're desperately needed ideas, but they're very far from being new ideas. And this is the kind of hope that people really need. So people are going to latch onto this when they do perceive that hope to be there. But it's very important to be realistic about whether or not it's actually there. And the misconception is that it's actually there. But people psychologically in times like these do need that hope to latch onto. But unfortunately, it is a false hope, because despite the fact that you have changed the face of the people that are there, you haven't changed the structure of what's there. It is an old expression to say, it's not the man in power. It's the structure of power itself. You can put anybody you want in the position of president. The system is still going to function essentially the same, because every system has its own internal logic. It has its own internal mechanisms that allow it to function, that make it do what it does. And that if you put something, another person in there that attempts to fundamentally alter it, that system will either find a way to push that person out, that essentially cancerous cell, that system will see them as a cancerous cell and push them out, or it will collapse and die because it is fundamentally incompatible with the changes that are attempting to be made. So seeing that person as like kind of a cancer cell attempting to alter the very nature of the cells and the functioning of that system is very much a very valid way of looking at it. It's an altering that cannot be accepted. So, and that's kind of what Trump was, except Trump could go along with it to some degree. And as his presidency went on, it became increasingly a greater danger until right to the end when he refused to step down and attempted to overthrow the government, which is why he won't be let in the future. And I stand very firm on that. The system will not let him be president again. He will not be allowed to be president again. If he gets in again, somehow he will mysteriously end up dead. The only possible conceivable way he could be president again is if he agrees to essentially do what the system tells him to do. The thing that every other president has always ever done, except for Kennedy, who ended up dead. But that's another topic for another time. The point here is while people can be happy and can take the win that is a city council full of, young women of color coming into an important office, and that the public is willing to accept such people into a public position. It is also important to remember that such a position fundamentally cannot be altered by the race or the sex of the people sitting in those chairs. The system is still the system. The capitalist system is still the capitalist system, and it still has to run by the logic of capital. Big business is still going to run St. Paul, and it will still have to pander and do the bidding of big business. Some very cosmetic changes may be made, but the system will fundamentally remain the same. And I wouldn't expect those women to still be there when the election cycle comes around again. I mean, they'll still be there, but don't expect them to get reelected, because I think that if they present enough of a problem, enough of a challenge, if they don't end up selling out, if they do stick to their guns and be the change that they say they're going to be, the system in one way or another will essentially make sure that they won't be able to run again. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.